Okay, are you ready? It's the big moment. We're getting married. So, usually, what I do for years in my in person classes is share actually pictures from my own wedding back when the dinosaurs roamed. So, my husband and I got married in 1999, and you can see in that first picture on the left, my son, my husband's stepson, my son Mac turned 3 years old the week before we got married. So he's sitting right there in his, what he would call his Cedo, because he couldn't say tuxedo. I can't even. And the moment from our wedding that everybody always laughs about is Mac is tiny. He still is tiny today. And so nothing ever fits him well. And so at one point, Sean was holding him during the ceremony. At one point, he was wandering around, all different things. And one point when he was walking around, his pants just completely fell down. And so we got married at my little elementary school's chapel. And so that we had a priest who was marrying us. And the priest, as he saw Mac's pants fall down to the ground, like announced it to everybody. He's like, and our pants are falling down. So um, thinking through weddings, yeah, I got married before Pinterest, right? Got married before the internet, basically, completely, actually, when I think about it. And so, like, if I were to have gotten married later with all of the various ideas that happen with weddings and, I don't know, chocolate fountains and cupcakes and, all the ideas for bridesmaids and everything else, I would have gone totally Pinterest crazy. I can't even imagine all the different crafts and things because I love all of that stuff that I would have managed to do. And so that's where I want to start with our discussion of marriage is a lot of times it's a gendered phenomenon, right? But a lot of times we can kind of focus on the weddings and maybe not so much how to prepare for like a long, happy marriage. And so we're going to start with weddings. And so I want to do like a little wedding guessing game with you all. So, what do you think the average wedding budget is? I'll give you a second and then I'll go through them because there's a lot to do on this slide. $35,000. And in Southern California, it's a good chunk more at $44,000. Okay, what do you think the average wedding dress price is? Students, when I ask this in-person classes, they're always like $6,000 or something like really ridiculous. But it's actually a very affordable $1,564 for an outfit that you're only going to wear once, right? The average age of the bride and groom. So it's the bride 29 and the groom 31. And that's gone up over the years as I continuously update these pieces of information. This is actually research that's coming from the website The Knot, which then means overall, because they're researching the people that use The Knot, that website, to get married, like that's going to be not necessarily a representative sample of everybody getting married in the United States, but still it's what we've got in this situation. So average number of guests, 139. Average number of bridesmaids. Students usually get this right. Although sometimes students are like 10. It's like, well, if that's the average, my goodness. It's 5. The most popular month to get engaged, December, right? So next time it's Christmas time, you can pay attention to all of those "A Kiss Begins with K" kind of commercials. Like, they're ice skating and then somebody's proposing. A lot of times those commercials, as I was just about to say, and then he's proposing, right? Very, very heteronormative. Although if you pay attention, you can start to see that there is some increasing relationship diversity in various advertisements. And so hopefully that will continue and that there will be different like various representations of relationships that are acknowledged as like valued and present and normalized, right? Because remember, heteronormative means what's the norm. So normalized in our society. Okay, last one. Average cost of a diamond ring. Ready? $6,163. That I will tell you, back in 1999, my little sweet that I love still to this day, sparkly little half carat. I don't even think it's a half carat ring. Did not cost that much because we were college kids and don't have it and don't even have it now in our middle adulthood lives as teachers. But whoever does have that average cost of a diamond ring, that's fantastic. I can't even begin to imagine. So, okay, moving on to the actual important stuff, successful marriages. So I want you to think about in your family, do you have someone that, a couple that has been married for, 15, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, or so on? And if you do have somebody or a couple in your family or in your life, right, that maybe it's friends, parents, or grandparents, or whoever it may be, have you ever asked a couple who has been married for a long time, like what they would say the secret to, a long, happy marriage is? I have gotten the chance to do that just once, I think. One time that I can really, it made an impact, and I remember. My grandma lived to be 92. I'm actually not talking about her marriage. I kind of suspect, although I didn't really get a chance to ask her, might not have been the happiest, but that's not the story. So, my grandma lived to be 92 years old. And when she passed away, we went back to Chicago, where my whole family's from, for her funeral. And so, her younger brother at the time, who was still in his late 80s, but Uncle Ted and his wife, Aunt Lorraine, were there, of course, to celebrate my grandmother's life. She'd had a long life, and they were there for the funeral. And so after the funeral, we all went out to eat, and Sean, my husband, and I, and my sister and her husband were all sitting with Uncle Ted and Aunt Lorraine. And so we asked them how long had they been married. We didn't really get a chance to see them too terribly much growing up because a lot of times when we went back to Chicago, we weren't there very long to see extended family. And so, oh, Uncle Ted, Aunt Lorraine, how long have you been married? And so it had been 63 years. How amazing is that? And so you have to ask, like, what's the secret to this marriage? And so we did. And without hesitating, they answered, we argue every day. And so Sean, my dear, sweet, naive husband, thought then he like added on. He thought he knew the secret. Oh, he says to them. So the secret is that you like both win the arguments. And before anybody said anything, Uncle Ted just winked at Sean and pointed at Aunt Lorraine. And so that idea of that, is their secret. And actually the next morning I did overhear them kind of, bickering with each other. And so, it was clear that they were in a very loving relationship, but, that's kind of, they were debating and bickering, and there was that kind of energy of communication. So it's not necessarily that every argument, as long as it's, kind of done in a respectful, even maybe sometimes playful way, is, an issue. So sometimes arguing and debating something out can be, a really valuable form of communication. So I would encourage you, if you get the opportunity, to ask other people in your lives what their secret to marriage is. But I do want to share with you 7 aspects of a successful marriage. This is something I've been using in my teaching for a very long time, and something that students oftentimes report. I oftentimes ask at the end of the semester in my classes, like, what would be the one concept that you really would remember? And I've had students, actually, I think more often than anything, cite these particular 7 aspects of successful marriage. So let me talk you through them. First, that you're best friends. And so I kind of think this is super cheesy. Like, they're my best friend. I guess I'm a really sarcastic, dry humored kind of a person. Like, I kind of go to a place where I'm like, come on, I wouldn't say that. That's so cheesy. But describe a best friend, right? Somebody who's trustworthy, somebody you probably share the same sense of humor, somebody that knows you, somebody that you have shared interests with, that kind of thing. Technically, yes, I can be as sarcastic and critical as I want, but technically, you do want somebody to be your best friend in this kind of significant relationship in your life. Next is that you like each other as a person. And so that's something that I think, kind of goes without saying, but I am sure you have seen couples sometimes where you're like, do you even like each other? And so also thinking about, let's go back to like Sternberg's triangle and, empty love, and that people can be very, very committed, but do they have that friendship? Do they like each other as a person? Next is that you believe marriage is a long-term sacred commitment. I will be honest with you, I struggle with this because I have parents that separated when I was 3 years old. And so I did not have the modeling of marriage in front of me actively when I was growing up. And so I've kind of, as I've grown up, because both my husband and I, we got married when we were young. I was 20, I just turned 23, and he's 15 months younger than I am. So of course we got married in the time where he's 2 years younger than I am instead of just one. So he was 21 at the time. He turned 22 later the month that we got married. But as you know, we've gone through this relationship as, young adults and into our 30s and now 40s. Like, as we have struggled, because it's inevitable in marriages, it seems, like I have kind of acted like, well, if this is not going to work, we should just end it. Because I don't necessarily have always had the belief that marriage is a long term sacred commitment. Sean, I have to give credit to. He really does believe that marriage is a long term sacred commitment. And his belief has saved us from me, basically, from myself. And so that's something that I have really, because of his modeling and because of how hard we have worked to develop a relationship that brings us both, love and satisfaction and joy, he's taught me to believe that marriage is a long-term sacred commitment, and that means a lot to me. I promise I won't start crying right now, but maybe. Okay, next is that you think your spouse has grown more interesting, and of course I have a story to go along with that too, but it's not a happy story. Part of the reason that Sean believed that marriage was a long-term sacred commitment is because he did have the modeling of that growing up. But his parents had him, Sean, and his brother when they were very, very young, 18 and 19, and then his brother was born 3 years later. And so when Sean and his brother went off to college to different states, Sean grew up in Oregon. He moved down here to California, which is how I met him. His brother went out to Iowa to play sports at a college out in Iowa. So, they've moved far away. Now his parents are in their very early or late 30s, quite honestly, and early 40s, and they have a whole nother part of their lives. They've spent their entire adulthood so far raising kids and being parents, and so now they get to reassess what they can do in life. And so Sean's mom wanted to travel, wanted to spend time with friends, wanted to go see her, sons in different states and everything, and kind of lead a vibrant, active life. Sean's dad didn't necessarily have the same ideas. He kind of saw, even though they were in, their early 40s, he didn't see a lot of their life left in front of him. He lost both of his parents when they're in their 50s. And so he didn't really have an idea of, living a really, really active life in, even middle age in this situation. And so he kind of, wanted to stay kind of on his own, not, spend a lot of time out socially. They live in a tiny one yellow blinking light town in Oregon on a piece of land where you don't see another soul. And so that's kind of isolating. And so this ended up being something that over the next, let's see, about 10 years or so, really like started to break down their marriage. And ultimately, after 33 years of marriage, Sean's mom left his dad. And so when I say that, you need to think your spouse has grown more interesting, I have seen firsthand through their marriage how that can really, really matter, which is why I always share that with my students, because you need to really develop interest, together and kind of have the same philosophy of life together to a certain extent. Speaking of which, you also need to agree on aims and goals. And so you need to make sure that you are working through and supporting each other on the large things that you want to accomplish in life. Next, you need to laugh together, right? You just have to. And hopefully you can laugh at things that you would otherwise be so embarrassed and mortified with, if you were in front of somebody else, but with your partner in life, your person, that you can just laugh hysterically until you're crying. And that person can make you laugh, especially when you're, stressed and or overwhelmed or scared or worried or upset or not feeling well. Like that's so, so incredibly valuable. And then the last one is that you want the relationship to succeed, right? It's again one of those things that seems like an obvious thing, but can be really, really important, that you want the relationship to be strong and you're willing to put forth the work it takes to make that happen. So The other thing that we're doing this week, you're reading a relatively brief piece, but it packs a heck of a lot in on Gottman's principles. So, John and Julie Gottman, John Gottman's actually a psychologist. His work's going to come up later in this class too, because he became well known for his ability to predict couples getting divorced. And I will share how that happens later. But they wrote together the 7 principles of how to stay married. So we have the 7 aspects of a successful marriage that I just discussed with you. That's not John Gottman. That is actually coming from, I think, an Intro to Soch book several years ago, but it really does seem to resonate a whole heck of a lot. But then the Gottman's work is something that I just wanted to introduce you to right now. I'm not going to talk through all of them by any means. I think that the first of all, the things that I will let you know, because I know that students sometimes struggle with this. On number 3, when you read about turning towards each other, it says that people in relationships will make bids for attention, and students will ask me, what do they mean by bids? Bids means like the things that you do to garner attention. And so, like, for instance, my thing that I do to garner attention, this is like this entire class is just me confessing my shortcomings. I do this. Right? I sigh, like these big, deep, dramatic, needless kind of sighs. Right? That's my bid for attention. Like, Sean has a choice in that situation. When he hears me sighing, he can either turn towards me, right, and say, are you okay? Or, something wrong? Or he can be like, oh, there she goes again, right? Sighing. And so I sometimes don't even realize I'm doing it. So, he'll be like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, why? Because you just sighed like 3 times, like that kind of thing. So that's what Gottman's mean by bids for attention. Like, what are your attention seeking behaviors? And does your partner, are they, willing to turn towards you and pay attention to you in those moments, or do they get frustrated by them? I think the things that they discuss under Solve Your Solvable Problems are so incredibly important. The idea of the softened startup, like the way that an argument starts is a lot of times the way that it's going to end. I think that can be incredibly valuable, and I hope you find that information to be valuable also. And then finally, the last one I want to touch on is number 7, create shared meaning. The reason I want to touch on it is because I really want to expand on the fact that you as a couple get the chance to create your own culture, right? So if you think through the traditions that mean a lot to you in your life growing up, your family traditions, and granted, everybody is coming from different family situations, but those moments and the ways that you would celebrate holidays that would feel like it's just your family that, has a particular, like, always on, I don't know, the first snowfall, even though we all live in California and there is no first snowfall, like always on the first snowfall, like you always have hot chocolate together or something like that. Those little moments, big, small, and otherwise, like when you're in a relationship, you get to create all of these different like special memories, but also traditions. I a lot of times in my intro to social classes will have students have to create their whole own culture, and that's a whole different thing. Where they create like basically their own society. And one of the things that I encourage them to do is that they get to come up with making their own holidays. And it's interesting and actually kind of sad how many groups that I've given them like a blank check, like create as many holidays as you want. And they don't. They're kind of like, well, we're going to have Christmas and Halloween. And they don't really come up with like every Friday we're going to have a holiday, something like that. They, are not really creative about it. In a relationship, you can be really, really creative about the traditions that you create. And they can be little things like every Friday, you sit down and, watch a TV show and pop popcorn, like with, I don't know, cinnamon sugar or something like that. But it's your special thing, right? Or like, for instance, Sean and I, we're going to sound super cheesy, but it's true. Our first Valentine's Day together, we both made each other something. And so now for the last, I guess we've celebrated our 22nd Valentine's Day together. We make each other something every year. Christmas presents. We tried to figure out like when we would open Christmas presents from each other, at what point during the day, because, we go to a brunch with our family, we host a Christmas dinner, so we're busy getting ready for that and everything else. Well, we decided years ago, our first year that we were married, that the last thing we would do on Christmas night is that's when we would open our gifts from the gifts we'd gotten each other. And so we look forward to it all day. And instead of just, having a gift tag on it that says, to Sean, love Nora, we write gift tags always that have like little hints or jokes or things like that, little riddles or something about what we'd gotten or something along those lines. And so those kinds of traditions, and those are just a couple of ours. And hopefully you're not thinking we're too cheesy. But what do you want to create? What kind of culture do you want to create? What kind of traditions do you want to create? Because marriages and relationships are going to have tough times. And a lot of times it's those happy things that when you can create as many of these moments and special things just for you and, your relationship and your family that can really, really carry you through the trickier parts of relationships. Okay, I've gone on and on and on, so I'm going to leave it there. But hopefully, this lecture, and especially hopefully these stories, when I tell stories, I mean for you to really not just listen to me talk, but to think for yourself and make those connections for yourself. So, hopefully, through kind of hearing these bits and pieces of my life and my family, that you're really able to start to think about those bits and pieces of yours.